对，坐。Thank you. Thank you. Very nice outside. Good. Going back. Yes.
manufacturers have already reduced portion sizes with little impact on obesity.
An era in Japanese space exploration has come to an end with the launch of the 50th and final mission using an H-2A rocket. The mainstay of Japan's space program for 24 years, the each launch costing around $70 million, is trying to compete with the likes of SpaceX in the United States. Its relatively low-cost replacement, the H-3, the British government has only condemned charts of the Glastonbury Festival with that duo Bob Dylan, fully condemned as Israeli military, and broadcast live on the BBC. The rapper Bobby Dylan led chants of free Palestine and death to the IDF during their set which faced just before the controversial Belfast rap in the That's the latest BBC News.
Calais welcomes a from our own correspondence. World service and hospital party. Coming up, amid the chaos and robust economic forum in St. Petersburg, race, second ethnicity issue. Also, Donald Trump wants to end overseas wars. We hear what his MAGA base thinks of US strikes on Iran. And finally, football legend Lionel Messi uses an ornate flask worth thousands of dollars to fill his yerba mate, but Uruguayans have been making it with a single gourd for centuries. An increasingly popular drink, an argument about who makes it best. But first, in a week which began with the news that the US had gone ahead with airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, fears of an accelerating regional conflict have for the time being been tempered. Iran gave advance warning of a retaliatory strike on the US military base in Doha. An attempted ceasefire was agreed between Iran and Israel, which has halted so far. Israel's attacks on Iran, which killed hundreds of civilians according to the United Nations, led thousands of people to flee cities under fire. Iranian attacks have killed 28 people in Israel, according to the authorities there. Ola Gering has been on Turkey's border with Iran, where she spoke to Iranians who were escaping the war and others going back home.
What would you grab if your country was being bombed and you were fleeing your home? One Iranian mother and her teenage daughter crossed the border with just a few small bags and a birdcage housing their beloved parakeet. They had run from the city of Karaja near Tehran. Like many we met, they didn't want to be named. Leaving Iran does not mean shedding the fear of the regime, which was carrying on with repression as usual right up to the bombing. Just 1 or 2 days before the war started, I got an SMS, the mother told us angrily. It said, "This is an Islamic country. You need to cover your hair." She assumed she had been spotted bareheaded by a traffic camera in the street. Now she and her daughter were safe from Iranian oppression and Israeli missiles, but with no place to go. "We hope to get to Europe," she said, her voice trailing off. "We don't know if any country will be good to us or take us in." They had just come through Turkey's Kapikoy border crossing under a baking sun. As Israel and then America pounded Iran, the crossing, flanked by rugged hills, had become a hub of relief and uncertainty. But even as mother and daughter were fleeing the world's newest war, others were going back home, though a ceasefire was yet to come. Some told us they were returning after holidays or work trips. Others said they were rushing back because they feared for their loved ones. Many were unwilling to be interviewed. "We're too afraid," one man said, as he headed into Iran. A government employee returning to Tehran with his family agreed to speak without being identified. "Would the regime fall?" I asked. "Yes, I think so," he said. "In the end, but not yet." And if that happens, he fears the military might take over. Among the cluster of arrivals on the Turkish side of the border, some wheeling designer luggage, others shouldering backpacks, there were conflicting views about the fate of the authorities. "They've been clinging on for decades," said a tall young man dressed head to toe in black, with a bitter shake of his head. "They can probably hang on a lot longer." He had been planning his exit for a year and already had a visa for Canada. An Iranian businessman called Ali told us the bombing had benefited the authorities in the short term. "My neighbours, my friends, my family, they were all very critical of the government," he said. "Now the frustrations have somehow been forgotten. They're supporting the government because it's under foreign attack. It's very different from before the war." Another factor now unifies Iranians, according to Ali. "Everyone says they hate Mr. Orange," he said, referring to President Trump. Ali's apartment is opposite Iranian state TV, which was hit by an Israeli airstrike. "I counted 4 missiles myself," he said. My place was shaking as if it was an earthquake. My city, Tehran, which I have always loved, now looks like a war zone. As for Iran's nuclear program, at the heart of that war, he said it destroyed 2 decades of our lives. Many we spoke to condemned Israel's killing of civilians in Iran. Hundreds have been killed, according to the United Nations. But some, like Dariush, who's 13, hoped that Israeli missiles would dislodge the regime. He came bounding onto Turkish soil, followed by his younger brother and his mother. When we asked to speak to her, she said, "You can talk to Dariush instead." The teenager was articulate and outspoken. We could hear the bombs and the missiles, he said. Thick black smoke was rising in front of our house. I wasn't scared at all. I was very happy about this, because I felt that finally my freedom was near. Then he punched the air and chanted, "Woman, life, freedom," the name of an Iranian protest movement brutally crushed in recent years. Dariush told us he would return home only when the Islamic Republic was gone. For now, there is a ceasefire, and despite the destruction and humiliation imposed on the regime, so far at least, it is holding on.
That was all again. Next, as the leaders gathered for the recent G7 summit, Vladimir Putin remained at home. The Russian leader is not without friends on the world stage. He's particularly close with his counterparts in Beijing and Tehran, and to some extent Washington DC. At these forums, though, Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine still very much the problem to be solved. But back in St. Petersburg, President Putin held a conference of his own. A regular fixture on the Russian calendar, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. It's seen as an opportunity to lure more foreign investment into the country. Though since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, many Western investors have largely stayed away. And while this was an economic summit in name, Steve Rosenberg found the focus this year to be very much more geared towards defense, complete with references to Russia's military might.
Imagine you're a president trying to attract foreign investment and boost your country's economy. Imagine, to help you do this, you've organised a big international economic forum, attended by people from, say, UK, 140 countries and territories. They were, the hosts, up on stage. What would you say? What killer line would you deliver that would be guaranteed to make a positive impression on your audience? One phrase, one comment that everyone would be talking about as they leave the hall. At his economic forum in St. Petersburg, President Putin came out with this line: "Where the foot of a Russian soldier steps, that's ours." That's what all the newspapers here, all the commentators in Russia have been talking about ever since. This is the Putin quote. The tabloid Moskovsky Komsomolets called it phrase of the day, phrase of the week, the most important phrase of recent years. With it, the newspaper said, Vladimir Putin succinctly and precisely summed up his current political credo and his long-term political strategy, the strategy of the foot of the Russian soldier. This phrase has nothing, of course, to do with the economy and everything to do with military ambition. And that is the point. Ever since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the goal of economic prosperity has come a distant second to the Kremlin's main objective, defeating Ukraine. And the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum did little to hide that. True, there were lots of shiny, sparkling display stands and company presentations, futuristic robots and AI galore. But on arrival at the exhibition centre, the very first thing you saw on display outside was the latest range of Russian military vehicles. Inside, the Ukrainian regions that Russia has seized, occupied, and claims to have annexed have been given their own display stands, and were flying Russian flags. Mind you, at this forum, it wasn't only the war in Ukraine that hung in the air. War in the Middle East was very much on people's minds, and that was before Donald Trump gave the orders for airstrikes at the weekend. As I was queuing up to enter the main hall ahead of Vladimir Putin's keynote speech, a Russian MP came up to me. "Tell me," he said, "are you going to drop a bomb?" "What bomb?" I asked. "A bomb on Iran," he replied. "I'm not planning to bomb anyone," I insisted. "Do you mean, is Donald Trump going to?" "Ah, Trump does whatever you tell him to do," the MP retorted. "The British are the ones pressing his buttons. You and the deep state." He smiled, but Russia's government isn't smiling. The prospect of regime change in Iran worries Moscow. In the last 6 months, the Kremlin has already lost one key ally in the Middle East, President Assad, deposed in Syria. President Putin will not want to lose another, especially since a few months back he signed a so-called Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Agreement with Iran. Crucially though, the Iran-Russia deal is not a military alliance. It does not oblige Moscow to come to Tehran's defense in the event of war. So, when Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin this week, there were words of support, plenty, from President Putin, but he seemed in no rush to provide Tehran with military assistance. After all, Russia is consumed by its own war against Ukraine. But aside from that, the Kremlin is keen to maintain strong ties with Israel too. We have good relations with the Israeli government. Russian MP and TV host Yevgeny Popov told me at the Economic Forum. He explained why. Israel did not impose sanctions on us, and it did not supply Ukraine with weapons. In other words, in the Middle East, Russia is engaged in a balancing act. When he makes speeches or TV appearances, President Putin tries to look and sound supremely confident. But I can't help feeling that at this year's St. Petersburg Forum, the overriding atmosphere was one of uncertainty. Uncertainty about the Russian economy. Even government officials were openly admitting there are signs of a recession. Uncertainty regarding Russia's war in Ukraine, now in its 4th year. Uncertainty about the situation in the Middle East. Not that uncertainty is a Russian monopoly. As Russian journalist and socialite Ksenia Sobchak pointed out when we chatted in St. Petersburg, maybe 3 years ago, when everything began, said Ksenia, referring to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, maybe then we in Russia could say, where is our future? But 3 years on, we see that all the world is on fire. Israel, Iran, Pakistan, India. Today, we all lack a good picture of the future.
That was Steve Rosenberg. You're listening to From Our Own Correspondent here on the BBC World Service. I'm Pascal Harter. Next to the United States, where the President's decision to join Israel's attack on Iran was, at first, with a mixed reception among his own supporters. On the campaign trail, Donald Trump often railed against America's involvement in overseas conflict, especially in the Middle East. The isolationist contingent inside Mr. Trump's Republican Party includes senior figures with the ear of the president. Dropping vital bombs on Iran, it was suggested, would run counter to the America First creed of his MAGA movement. But after the initial outrage, dissident MAGA voices reunited in fulsome praise for the president. Bernd de Boosman watched events unfold and opinion turn in the US Capitol.
I was standing on a rooftop in the sweltering, humid heat of Washington, D.C., admiring the skyline near the National Cathedral, when phones across the roof began ringing and buzzing nearly in unison, including my own. To my right and left, journalists, diplomats, and government staffers were glancing down at their phones, gasping audibly and eyes widening before a sudden mad dash to Ubers and cars. It had happened. After days of mixed signals from Donald Trump, the U.S. had struck Iran's nuclear facilities. The airstrikes on facilities in Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan capped off 2 weeks of twists and turns which, even by the standards of Trump's White House, were chaotic and uncertain. Just 10 days earlier, I covered what seemed to be a relatively tame congressional picnic at the White House. As lawmakers gathered on the South Lawn, the president signaled that he would like to give diplomatic talks with Tehran another chance. Hours later, Israel began striking Iranian military sites. That evening began a series of confusing days and nights in which President Trump kept the world guessing as to his true intentions. The final decision ultimately came on Saturday while flying on Marine One, the presidential helicopter, over his opulent estate in New Jersey via a phone call to Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. For Mr. Trump, the decision was a politically tricky one. He had, after all, campaigned heavily on avoiding messy foreign entanglements, or, in his words, the stupid endless wars like those which brought thousands of young Americans home in flag-draped coffins from Iraq and Afghanistan. It was a message that found a receptive audience in the isolationist wing of the supporters. And after news of the strikes broke, several high-profile loyalists were quick to criticize the president. Capitol Hill ally Marjorie Taylor Greene lambasted the financial cost of foreign wars at a time when the U.S. debt is hovering around $37 trillion. The former Fox News host, Tucker Carlson, also invoked the specter of the Iraq War. But for all their initial clamor, it was noticeable how quickly most fell in line behind the president, praising him for a quick, clean strike that did not lead to further conflict. Donald Trump later said that Tucker Carlson had called to apologize, and he posted a quick thank God after the bomb was dropped. Trump's former strategist, Steve Bannon, for his part, praised the president for what he termed a one-and-done raid that avoided the ugly possibility of managing regime change in Tehran on Israel's behalf. A leading voice in the MAGA movement, Jack Posobiec, had told his many followers that an Iran strike would disastrously split the pro-Trump movement, but ended up seemingly praising the president for ending Iran's nuclear ambitions as had been promised from day one. That shift came as no surprise to me. My experience covering rally after rally of the 2024 election left me convinced that in U.S. politics there is no one that can inspire the same sort of devotion among supporters as Donald Trump. On the other end of the debate were the Iran hawks in the Republican establishment, who had long been eager for the U.S. or Israel to eliminate any possibility that Iran could build a functioning nuclear weapon or forever upset the balance of power in the Middle East. Just days before the attack, Mr. Trump had set a 2-week deadline to give talks a chance, which many in Washington, myself included, took as a sign that he was trying to lower the temperature. Maybe, just maybe, he would sit this war out. His words were later described as a head fake by officials, a sporting ruse that many within his own administration were unaware of. But the die was already cast after midnight on Friday, when 1,000 miles away from Washington, at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, 7 futuristic-looking B-2 Spirit bombers took off and headed east, each armed with a pair of massive bunker-busting bombs. The saga has left many in Washington with a lesson that, even for those working closest to him, it is impossible to predict what Donald Trump, perhaps the most unpredictable president in U.S. history, will do.
Birds to Guzman. Finally, have you ever heard of the traditional Latin American drink mate? For the uninitiated, it is a caffeine-rich herbal brew made by infusing dried yerba mate leaves in hot water. And there are very specific rules on how to serve it. Argentina is its biggest exporter, and arguably the country most often associated with it. But on a recent visit to Argentina's smaller landlocked neighbour Paraguay, our reporter Jane Chambers discovered that they're also passionate about mate culture and somewhat miffed by it always being associated with their bigger neighbour.
We're driving through a fiery red and pink sunrise with mist shrouding the fields and lush green volcanoes rearing up in the distance. I'm in a car full of Paraguayans, and Erica is busy trying to pour boiling water from a flask into a gourd full of dried mate leaves. She manages it without giving herself third-degree burns, which is a relief, given I'm sitting next to her. She passes the brew around the car, and the passengers start taking appreciative sips out of the traditional metal straw, known as a bombino. The other mate comes from a shrub that can grow into a 15 meters tall tree. The Guarani people, who lived across South America, foraged for its leaves hundreds of years ago. For them, it was a sacred drink with energizing health benefits that reduce hunger pangs. These days it's grown in plantations by indigenous communities and small-scale farmers. Drinking it is a communal experience that shows friendship and respect for others. Erica offers me a sip. I politely refuse. I have to confess, a few times I've tried mate. Taste conjures up old, dry grass like lawnmowers. But I'm a Philistine. Those in the know compare it to strong green tea, which can be bitter or sweet, depending on how much sugar you add. The taste for it stretches across this region, and it's recently been going global thanks to viral videos. Football legend Lionel Messi is a huge fan. He recently showed off his $1,000 mate brewing setup on TikTok, but Paraguay bristles a little about its national drink being so prominently linked to another country. I don't know why everyone thinks of Argentina when they hear the word mate, Erica says wistfully. I suppose it's because they're so much bigger and more powerful, but it's part of our daily life. I started drinking it when I was a baby. Just like the other mate drinking countries of Argentina, Uruguay and Brazil, Paraguayans take its preparation seriously. Traditional gourds are made from dried squash or calabash, the fruit of a tropical tree. Once dry, they become hard like wood and need to be cured before use by soaking them in water so they don't crack. There's an elaborate etiquette to drinking it and a long list of no-nos. Do not grab, move, swirl or play with the bombina straw. This can potentially ruin the taste of the mate. And do not take too long to drink it because the rest of the fruit may grow impatient and so on. We dedicate the first sip to its patron saint, Santo Tomas, Erica explained. If you don't, it's bad luck. But a hot sip of mate is not the only option. We like to start with mate, which is a hot drink. As the day warms up, we move on to tereré, which we drink with cold water, lots of ice, Billy explains. Temperatures frequently climb to over 35 degrees here. This cooling drink made with the other mate, as well as other medicinal herbs, is an adaptation unique to Paraguay. Tereré is the Guarani ancestral drink of Paraguay, and known as Paraguayan green gold. Jesuit priests in the 16th century remarked on how popular it was with the locals. The Spanish conquistadores, often keen to suppress local cultural quirks, even tried to ban people from drinking it, calling it a vice which induced laziness. But no one paid them any notice, and in the 17th century, Jesuit missionaries started the mass cultivation of yerba mate, grown by indigenous communities. For 300 years, it was a vital part of the country's economy, even used as currency when metal coins weren't available. Julia tells me she likes to visit the local market where Guarani women sell medicinal herbs like boldo, lemongrass or peppermint to mush up in a mortar to add to the tereré. They know what herbs work for a stomachache and other things, even if you just split up with your boyfriend, had a fight with your mother, or need luck to pass an exam, she explains. She says that mate and tereré drinkers are part of a larger brotherhood of Guarani-speaking people who used to live in the lush regions of what's now Paraguay, Brazil, and parts of Argentina. So really, mate is a drink that goes beyond borders, but Julia's not giving up on her own country's claim. She flashes me a triumphant smile. Did you know that the scientific name for yerba mate is Ilex paraguayensis, she asked. See, it even has our name.
And that was Jane Chase. I'm Pascal Harter. The producer was Fahana Haider. And you can hear more stories of the real lives behind the news headlines on the From Our Own Correspondents podcast. And we'll be back again with fresh stories next weekend here on the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service with Lubna Care, exploring Pakistan's diabetes crisis.
I'm a British Pakistani pharmacist and also an actor, writer and comedian. In Pakistan, diabetes isn't just a medical condition, it's a national crisis.
There's a lack of awareness. There's low health literacy. Public hospitals are stretched.
Pakistan's diabetes surge is fueled by urbanization, processed foods high in refined sugars, and increasingly sedentary lifestyles.
I had a client 8 years old and he used to play cricket on the tap. He doesn't know that he can play that cricket outside in the ground.
If this is not addressed, then this will be a crisis beyond what we can imagine over the next decade.
Diabetes in Pakistan, a nation's struggle. Thursday at 8:30 and 19 GMT.
Hello, I'm John Simpson. Join me after the news for Unspun World, the programme that goes behind the headlines to find out what's really going on. This week, has the regime in Iran managed to weather the storm of attacks from Israel and a BBC film gives a remarkable insight into the ferocious gangland culture of Cape Town.
BBC News with Chris Perry. The head of the United Nations nuclear watchdog, Rafael Grossi, has said Iran has the capacity to start enriching uranium again in a matter of months. The statement contradicts White House assertions that Iran's nuclear program has been set back years. The Israeli military says it's killed one of the founders of Hamas in Gaza City. The IDF says Hakam Mohammed Issa al-Issa played a significant role in the Hamas attack on Israel in October 2023. India has angrily rejected a Pakistani army statement that a suicide attack that killed at least 13 Pakistani soldiers on Saturday was carried out by militants backed by Delhi. The incident is one of the deadliest in the border area in recent months. Riot police have clashed with anti-government protesters in Serbia's capital Belgrade. Some protesters threw flares and other missiles at police. Tens of thousands of people have gathered to demand early elections. The US Senate has vowed to advance President Trump's tax and spending bill for debate. Procedural votes at horse trading to get all Republican senators on board took over 3 hours instead of the usual 15 minutes. New rules will come into force in France today, prohibiting smoking on beaches and in public parks and other areas where children could be present. Supporters say the ban will protect children from the dangers of passive smoking. Britain has agreed what it describes as the world's first partnership with the food industry to tackle widespread obesity. Ministers want supermarkets and manufacturers to promote healthier foods and drinks. An era in Japanese space exploration has come to an end with the launch of the 50th and final mission using an H-2A rocket. Its relatively low-cost replacement, the H-3, is due to go on its next mission later this year. That's the latest world news from the BBC.
Hello, this is The Explanation from the BBC World Service, recorded on the 25th of June. I'm John Simpson, and you're listening to Unspun World, where we go behind the headlines with the BBC's unmatched correspondents to find out what's really going on. On this week's programme, has the regime in Iran managed to weather the storm?
The chain of command seems to be functioning, although it has suffered heavy blows. They will think of finding some proper deterrence.
The war on Ukraine, has it unexpectedly rescued NATO, in spite of, maybe because of, Donald Trump?
We have the attack on Ukraine by Russia, which has given essentially NATO a renewed sense of purpose.
And a BBC film gives a remarkable insight into the ferocious gangland culture of Cape Town.
Everybody's getting killed, and if I say everybody, made up of children, and young children are born into this lifestyle of drugs, gangsterism, and violence, and also living with that trauma continues.
So, did America's stealth bombers completely and fully obliterate Iran's nuclear sites, as President Trump has declared?
When you take a look at the ground above, don't forget the flame is all underground, but everything above, if you look at the before and the after picture, everything above is burned black, the trees, everything. There's one building, but that's a building that sunk substantially into the granite. I believe it was total obliteration.
Or, as the intelligence arm of the Pentagon said in a leaked report, could key elements, including the centrifuges, be restarted within months? Donald Trump does seem to have achieved at least a temporary halt to the missile exchanges between Iran and Israel, even if stepping in and bombing Iran himself seemed like a strange way of going about it. So what have people in Iran itself made of all this? I turned to Baran Abbasi of BBC Persian for information.
It's definitely exposed the regime's vulnerabilities, and its back is up against the wall at the moment. The Supreme Leader had said that Israel will not dare attack, and when it happened, it showed the miscalculation on the part of the regime. That's the hypocrisy, the fact that they are quick to crack down on women who refuse to wear the headscarf, but when it comes to standing up to a major military threat, they remain powerless.
And the Supreme Leader himself didn't really show supreme leadership qualities, did he? I mean, he vanished from sight, seemed to beg the Russians for help. I mean, it didn't look good, did it?
Exactly. There are reports that he is hiding in a bunker somewhere. He only is communicating through a trusted aide with his generals and has suspended all electronic communication to make it harder to be found. He always prioritizes his own survival and his regime's survival to everything else.
Let's go back over that extraordinary period of 24 hours, whatever it was, when Iran warned the Americans, the Qataris, the British, that they were actually going to be bombing the American base in Qatar. How much would people in Iran have known that that was a kind of set-up job rather than a ferocious counterattack by Iran?
It has fully sources. Those who are loyal to their regime believe this narrative, because the regime is saying that we totally shattered that narrative and we dealt a heavy blow to the Americans, and the American president begged us for a ceasefire. And so they went to a main square in central Tehran and they celebrated. There is huge skepticism amongst the majority of ordinary Iranians about the government's narrative, of course. They know that Iran was trying to find an escape route without losing face.